soil physical structure is key. You have to have your soil structure, keep an eye on it, be working to prevent compaction. Keep your machinery controlled trafficking on your field. Don't drive unnecessarily on the field, especially when it's wet. Reduce the number of passes, dual tires, wider, spread your weight. And then I suppose from a soil biology point of view, organic matter.
As harvest is winding down on many farms, the attention turns to next year's crop. Reflection is needed to assess not just the average yield across the farm, but the yields from fields and down to why one field performed better or worse than the average. The chances are fields with better or healthier soils give a higher yield. We all need to ask, can all of my soils be brought up to this level? You're listening to the latest episode of the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. We would really appreciate it if you could listen, follow, and give us a review on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from. Regular assessment of soils should be carried out by all farmers according to Dr. Veronica Nyhan, a soil and plant specialist in Teagasc. I'm delighted to be joined by Veronica on the podcast to explain why and how to carry out these soil assessments.
So when we talk about soil functionality and soil health, we really focus on the three properties, the main properties of soil: the soil physical, the soil chemical, and the soil biological properties. To break that down into simpler language, soil physical properties are the soil structure itself. So maintaining a healthy soil structure and assessing it at irregular intervals. Soil structure, physical structure should be assessed really annually. And where you see issues with structural integrity degrading, maybe even twice a year. And we use the VES or the double spade method to do that. Soil chemistry is looking at your soil nutrient profile, your organic carbon, and we test those properties every 3 to 5 years on farm. Regulations now insist that it's at least every 5 years. Probably better to go more regularly on tillage systems. And finally, soil biology. Soil biology can be assessed in really sophisticated ways, but just a general examination of the soil macroorganisms or the soil rooting depth can be a real strong indicator of a healthy soil. So earthworms is the key indicator we use. Nematodes is becoming a more popular indicator in research as well. And they tell us earthworms like a well-structured, healthy, functional soil. So high levels of earthworm populations is a good indicator of soil health.
Okay, and when you mentioned the chemical properties, most farmers would have those already. They have pH already, they have P's and K's and those kind of things already.
Yeah, organic matter is another one to keep an eye on. The regulations say it has to be tested, I think, once every 12 years, but really, you could keep an eye on it more regularly than that, especially if you're trying to build your carbons or organic matters in your soil.
Okay, so does the soil texture, as in the amount of clay or silt or sand they have, does that affect the structure, and how do I test for it, I suppose?
The soil texture is something you can't really change in the soil and has a massive influence on how your soil functions. So obviously sandy soils are drier, they're less, they hold water less well, they hold nutrients less well, but they, they're very free draining soils, whereas heavier soils, clay soils, can get quite wet. They're denser soils, they're very good at holding fertility, they're very good at holding water, maybe too good to the point that they can hold it for too long and they're susceptible to damage. As I said, it's not something you can change, it's something you work around. You match your functionality to the soil texture. If you want to check your soil texture, you can do it. There's sedimentation tests and various lab-based, but a simple texture by field. Now, it's a subjective test and you'd want to practice it fairly regularly. But there is a flowchart there that you can follow through and it gives you an indication of your soil texture.
And plenty of YouTube videos, I noticed.
Absolutely,
that there as well.
I think so, yeah.
Okay. You mentioned, just as you were passing by there in terms of tests or simple tests you can do, and you mentioned the double spade tests. You might describe that a little bit.
So the VES is the visual examination of soil structure. It's been around since the 1940s. And basically it has evolved to suit different soil types and different systems. In Ireland, we'd have the grass VES, which we use on grassland. There's a sub-vest for looking at subsoils. And so the vest, it can be either digging out a core of soil, or it can look at a profile down to a depth of a metre, metre and a half. What the double spade is, it kind of takes a combination of both the grass vest and the sub vest and merges it into a mini profile examination. So you're essentially looking at a profile in situ to about 40 centimetres, and you're looking to that depth because of the fact that you could have subsurface compaction in a tillage system. You're more likely to have it than in a grass.
So it's going below the plough layer.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay. So what you're trying to do in a double spade method is see the topsoil, but also see into the subsoil and see if there is a layer of compaction between the plough pan.
So it's a spade, it's a physical kind of thing. It's something that is easily done. Bit of hard work to dig it out, I suppose, really. It's
a visual, tactile. It's all about what you see and what you feel. It's subjective, but that's a good thing about it. And you're looking at the soil. There are other, you can get penetrometers, probes, things like that, but really you can't beat the double spade method to just physically see what's in the soil. Essentially, it's cheap. You only need your spade, you need a trowel or a knife, and you just need a measuring tape. And then we have the scorecard, which is available on the Teagasc website.
Okay. And the other thing you need is a bit of time. How much time does it take?
Well, if you've never done one before, budget a fair bit, because you will question yourself. And another thing too is if you go get somebody to come with you, because I think the first time you do any of these tests, it's nice to have somebody to say, what do you think? What do you feel? But look, when you get kind of used to doing them, the grass vest can take about 15 minutes, the double spade, because it's a little deeper, maybe 20. And then you'd want to do a few of them around the field to get an accurate assessment of the field in general.
And is there ideal soil conditions for when you should take it? Is now a good time so it's relatively dry, or should it be a bit wetter? Or
you wanted it fairly moist now. Doing it when it's dry will soils are stronger when they're dry, so your beds will be more resistant to rupture and things like that. So you would want the soil to be fairly moist. You also kind of want to go at a time of the year where, you've good rooting depth, leaving it too late, the roots just start to degrade and you won't get a good visual. So this is a good time of the year to be doing it.
Okay. And again, for somebody going at this, I mean, I suppose farmers will have an idea of what it's like from the back of the tractor, what's it like when I'm ploughing. It's pretty tough going through that area or that kind of stuff. Getting down and looking at the soil and making an assessment whether it's this or whether it's that. Should farmers be afraid of it, or is that just a straightforward, it's very easy, you either see it or you don't see it, you either feel it or you don't feel it?
I would definitely say farmers shouldn't be afraid of this test. If you want guidance, consult your advisor, but when you start doing it, it's an extremely effective way to manage your farm, and it is something all farmers should be doing. I mean, it's often said the spade should be your first tool in your soil management. So I wouldn't be afraid of it. There's plenty of guidance on it, but even we have our own Soil Structure ABC booklet, which gives a very detailed account of how to do the test.
Okay, and I noticed then we have a video on at the Crops Forum, and I think there's more videos online there as well. And I just noticed you're prodding the knife in to see how much resistance it is kind of going into it, which gives an idea about how solid or not solid it is. Is that the kind of the scenario?
So the first thing when you dig the profile, you're trying to distinguish between the different layers, and that's through penetration with your trowel or your knife. You're trying to see where you're moving from areas that are have fairly good give in them to fairly resistant. And then you separate out, or you essentially delineate where the layers have changed from relatively uncompacted to denser and more difficult to penetrate. Okay. So that's the first step. And then after that, within each of the layers, so you could have 2 layers, you might have 3 layers. If you have a plough pan, you probably will have 3 layers. After that, then you're going to look at various soil physical properties relating to the aggregates or PEDs, or essentially the soil crumb structure. How open it is, how porous it is there roots moving through it, the size, the shape of it, the colour of it, the smell of it. And based on looking at all those parameters, you'll decide the structural quality or SQ value of each layer. And that's essentially how the test works.
Okay, so it's again relatively simple, that anybody can take out a big lump of soil and they can look and see what's in it. They can crunch it in their hand and see whether it breaks apart easily or not, and how it breaks apart. If it's very flat going across the surface, it's probably, there might be compaction in there potentially. If it kind of breaks nicely, it's terrific. Yeah,
well, essentially, like a well-structured soil, to put a very kind of simple, visual to it, it should be, the crumbs should be small. They should be easily ruptured or break apart very easily, and they should be round more than flat surfaces. You want nice rounded, because ultimately you want rounded structures create gaps between them, and that's where your air will sit in the soil. And yet within the aggregates, there is smaller pore spaces, the micropores, and that's where water is held in the soil. So you get a nice balance of air and water. And the macropores around the aggregates is also the space through which all your earthworms, all your soil organisms, your roots, everything is going to move through those. So you want it to be very open and free draining. Okay.
And of course, as we said, you will easily identify compaction within that scenario with those kind of very tight layers in it. I suppose identifying is one thing. So what about trying to alleviate that then at the other side of it? What's your best advice in terms of trying to tackle a bit of compaction, whether it's more towards the surface or maybe just underneath the plough pan?
So if it's close to the surface, basically we try not to do mechanical intervention as much as possible. So utilising things like organic matter. So soil structure is ultimately caused or created by the attraction between positive and negative charges in the soil. Organic matter supplies negative charges when we add extra organic matter to the soil. It's also a glue kind of almost that brings soil particles together and helps them come together in a nice crumb structure. So increasing organic matter in the soil, it also acts as a food source for your soil microorganisms. So earthworms come where there's organic matter, and these all are activities that will push the soil apart, break up bigger beds, or push the soil together to create the aggregate structure. Roots, good rooting, deeper roots, so things like cover crops with tap roots, including them in your system, or alternating into things like oilseed rape, where you have a different rooting structure, will all help break through. Now, no crop likes a compacted soil, but they definitely help alleviate some level of close to the surface compaction that's going on there. Other factors would be, if you did have a certain amount and you're in an inversion based or plough based system, alternating the ploughing depth slightly can help alleviate some compaction in the upper layers. You just want to be careful that you're not creating a deeper problem when you do that.
I suppose there are machines called subsoilers out there.
Oh, yeah.
Are they pretty much kind of not really where you would like to go?
So where you have deeper compaction, subsoiling is an option. The problem with subsoiling in Ireland is that it rarely suits our climate. And it's something that if you get it wrong, you get it very wrong. The idea of the subsoiler is that you need to get it just underneath where this compacted layer is, and you want to have the soil underneath that to be free draining. So what you're doing is you're moving the leg of the subsoiler through the soil, and you're essentially causing it to fracture. When rain hits it, then you've removed the compacted layer and the water should just move straight through. If you haven't done it to the right depth, it'll just fill back up with water, but that newly fractured soil will just slump probably and create a bigger problem. If you have done it when the soil at that depth was wet, what you've probably actually done is created something similar to your plough pan, but now below a depth that you can actually remediate it. So it's just one that if you are going to do it, you need to be very careful. You need to do a dig. You need to figure out where the layer of compaction is. You need to figure it out where it is consistently across the area that's in trouble. And you need to make sure you do your subsoiling at a time when the soil is dry at that depth, so you're not smearing and creating a new problem further down.
So does it ever in Ireland get dry at that depth?
You see, this is the other thing. Like, if you're getting dry at that depth and you have a fairly good clay content of your soil will do a lot for itself. Like, one of the biggest things is resting, like to alleviate compaction, because clay, when it dries, clay has great capacity to increase it in volume and reduce. So as it heats and cools, wets and dries, it will actually create cracks itself. So we've all seen in the drought, you go out to the field and there's a big massive crack in the soil. That's soil structure development going on right there. You know, so if the soil gets that dry and it's a fairly, has a fairly good clay content, you'll see it start to remediate itself.
And I suppose given last year, maybe even the year before, a lot of rain, a lot of drainage issues, or what appear to be drainage issues out there, is there, or can you tell whether it's compaction or drainage?
Well, look, if you've seen water, and I happen to ourselves at home, and I think especially now we've moved into with land mobility, we've a lot more people renting land and newly leased land. And they're not familiar with where the drains are in the ground. We did see a lot of what looked like high water tables, but was probably just impeded drainage systems in place. So if you are leasing ground, it's the first thing you should check. Speak to the landowner, ask where the drains are, check the output drain, that there's no shores blocked in it. And see how that does. And the other thing with drainage to remember is, if you correct drainage today, you may not see the effects of that remediation for a year or so. So don't jump in straight away and say, the drains are blocked, or I've unblocked the drains, but they're not working anymore. I must need more drains. Drainage doesn't correct itself overnight. It just needs a bit of time to remediate.
For the structure to kind of get back in place.
Well, for the drains to essentially, when you put in new drains particularly, they need time to settle in and work. But it's the first thing I'd be doing if I was taking, or if I was looking at a problem, is fix the drains that are already in situ.
We're only getting warmed up, but I'm only going to ask you one more question. And you mentioned it earlier around soil biology. And there's a lot of talk about soil biology, ergo maybe soil health. What, in your opinion, is the best strategy to try and improve that over time? Soil
physical structure is key. You have to have your soil structure, keep an eye on it, be working to prevent compaction. Keep your machinery controlled trafficking on your field. Don't drive unnecessarily on the field, especially when it's wet. Reduce the number of passes, dual tyres, wider, spread your weight. Livestock as well, just be aware of all that. And then I suppose from a soil biology point of view, organic matter. So, in tillage systems, especially specialised tillage with no stock on farm, it can be very difficult to get access to organic matter, and I appreciate that. But at the same time, if we can build organic matter on tillage soils, they tend to be depleted. Organic matter not only helps bring soil aggregates together, but it also increases the food source for all the other organisms that will help bring soil aggregates together. And it's a source of nutrients, so it's a no-brainer, really.
And just within that, does it matter what does it matter what organic matter it is in terms of straw being incorporated, or slurries, or farmyard manure best, or does it really matter?
I'd say anything's better than nothing. But obviously, if you're talking about building higher carbon levels in the higher dry matter, higher carbon levels in the manure will help that process more than kind of watery, very dilute, very low dry matter ones.
So the likes of farmyard manure would be probably the go-to one if you can manage to get it.
Yeah, if you can manage to get it, and good quality stuff. And also stuff, if it can be composted, even better, because it tends to come into the soil more harmonious with the soil biology when it's been broken down aerobically. But, that's really looking for the golden choice.
Golden choice. Well, look, we'll leave it at that in terms of That's the challenge for lots of growers out there. Try and maybe, I know straw's worth a lot of money, but try and maybe get a swap deal or something around farmyard manure and get a little bit onto the farm, because as Veronica's saying here, it's going to do your soil a huge amount of good.
Yeah.
Veronica, thanks very much.
No bother. Thank you.
So that's it for this week, and my thanks to Veronica for joining me on the show. Veronica gave an excellent presentation to the Teagasc Crops Forum this week. We will replace some of the other presentations on rotations, planting winter barley, soil drainage and protecting water over the coming months. So that's it for this week, and if you enjoyed the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, rate, review and follow on Apple or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening. I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.